Adventures of Asher Robin, God's Pirate. The Tom Robbins Special, written and narrated by Micah Buchan, or, for the case of this story, M.L. Buchan. Enjoy.
The Tom Robbins Special. Well, kind of wondering, what is the Tom Robbins Special is? What is the Tom Robbins Special? Well, I think it takes place in book 4 when they're gonna find Micah's mom. I forget her name, but Asher says it's hard because he wanted to say Pa, but it's just hard. They haven't been together much, but we'll just say Dad. Tom said yes. Why did Bonebreaker have the vest down to his ankles? And Tom Robbins said, "Oh, that guy. Well, we were looking for a crew, and we heard of islanders, and we stumbled upon a big, it looked like a burial of a giant, and we looked to the right, and there, hanging on a tree, was the Bonebreaker stumbled, and I fell, and Bonebreaker and I, it was the clothes, it was the vest, it was like a closet, and we saw like buried ashes or something, and then just discovering that, and then Asher said, what happened next? And Asher said, I can't remember, but when we're done all this finding this Jackson Green scene, will not Jackson Green scene, what is and then Asher said, why did you Tom Robbins said, what son? And then Asher said, when did you fall into darkness? Tom Robbins said, well, when I found out that I've told you this before, but I'm just gonna say the same thing over and when I thought you had passed, and there was rumors going about that maybe you were taken by some pirate, and and then, well, what else happened, said Asher, in the whole finding the vest thing? Ooh, we were looking for treasure. That's why we were looking for crews too. See, we heard about islanders and yeah. We found like this big rock tomb. No, it wasn't a tomb. It was something like a cave. So we went in, and then there was like this giant bed with this kitchen, and then we went down and down, and then we finally got lost in this cave. We went down to the depths, and there was chests. And then we brought a shovel, of course, and a key. So we opened. Well, first of all, Bonebreaker and I, and don't forget Tooth Snatcher. Tooth Snatchers said, "Well, I'm gonna go back to the island." And then while was he walking back to the island that they were working on with slaves, of course. And then as he was walking back, he got attacked by islanders. They jumped out of a tree, and with a rope, they tied it to a tree and said, "Come with us." And they just left him there. Ran off. And then Bonebreaker and I, we heard that. So we ran on over, and then there were islanders. Well, Tom Robbins said, this is when I was walking in darkness, you see. Now, I really wanted to get vengeance for the islanders, because who knows? So what I did is I untied it. I slid that same boot. But he still has a peg leg, right? And then when he slid the boot from his boot, the knife from his boot, that was the first time he used it. And then going back into book 4, that was when. Yeah. And Tom Robbins said to the islanders, "What is your name?" Well, I think their names would be, they're Indians, right? And then I think they were called, if I can remember, they were called, there's 3 of them. Johnny was one of the boys, and it was all boys. Johnny was one of them, and John was the 3rd. Johnny was the last, and then John was the middle one. He was the 3rd born, and then they got a bow, sword, pickaxe. Okay, and they started to shoot at Tom Robbins and Bonebreaker. And Tooth Snatcher, he wiggled out before all of this. He started running. Well, they started running with them, the islanders, and then Tom Robbins, he grabbed a bush and plucked it up with his strong hands and threw it at the islanders. That caused them to fall. And then Oh man, this is gonna be a crazy chase scene, I tell you. And then that's what Tom Robin did. Then he took a vine and he swung over their heads and landed right onto their hands because they fell like their head first and then their hands before them. And then he landed on their hands. That sunk into the ground. And then Bonebreaker. This is going to be a little harsh because there's 3 of them. And so he takes his club from like on his side. He takes his club on his side and then just smashes their ankles because he's Bonebreaker. And then that was the last one, Johnny. So and then the other 3, they say, "We'll call you Bonebreaker for the rest of your life." And then Tom Robin, he swung on the vine to another branch, and then the 2, they helped Johnny up, and then he ran away, like limping or something, and then maybe they tied him to a vine, and then they pushed him into their camp on the vine, and then he swung into there, and now the cooks, the doctors will help him out then. Then the 2, Johnny, and the first one is called James, not James. So his name was Peter. Yeah, Peter, his other name was Peter. And then Peter ran with John. And then what happened is they were chasing Tooth Snatcher and Tom Robin. And of course, Bonebreaker, who is now his new name. Well, his name before that would have been like something dreadful. Like a rock smash? No. Yeah, we'll think of it later. So they were leading there. They were like, they're gonna trap eventually John and the other guy, and so they ran on a force because Tooth Snatcher, Tom Robin, Blackbones, they're smart because they're like the guys that they're being chased by, John and the other guy, they're like, I would say they're 14 and 15. So 14 and 15, that's probably young. And Tom Robin, I would say, like, depends on the real author. But yeah, they found this swamp. Then then there was puddles. Like, you know when there's lily pads? There's vines hanging from them. But the islanders, they didn't see them. So what? And then Tooth Snatcher made a distraction. Well, they went across, and then they tried to as well, and then boom, they fell right into the swamp, and then Tooth Snatcher could take a branch, and he could drop down onto a lily pad, and then he could swing onto a vine onto the other side where Tooth Snatcher and actually, Bonebreaker and Blackbones were. And then they ran around. And then soon before, the other islanders were made sure, and then boom, there was like 5 of them dropping down from vines, and it was like an ambush. And then Tooth Snatcher, he ran away, and the 5 islanders, I don't know their names, but what they were doing is they heard about what Johnny was done, and then they took it was Bonebreaker. He was captured, and then Tooth Snatcher and Captain Blackbones, they acted as if they were shot dead, and then the islanders they ran, and then they got up, and then they started tiptoeing, and they eventually got to their camp, and then they climbed up a branch, pulled out their swords, and jumped right in front of a woman who was cooking. And then, yeah. That is the exciting suspense of the Tom Robbins special. If Papa's going to make, the author, Elijah Buchan, he is going to make a introduce of, if you have any questions, you can put them on online or something. The end.